Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here, back in the video. Today's episode, we're taking a look at the Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian Guide in Diablo 4. So, Hammer of the Ancients is a very interesting build. At surface level, it looks like Hammer of the Ancients actually has a very small area of effect. However, through tempering, we can increase the size of Hammer of the Ancients. We'll be using spells like Lunging Strike to help keep our fury up. And for defensive purposes, we'll be using Challenging Shout and Rallying Cry for the Unstoppable Fortified generation. That being said, we'll go ahead and jump into the guide itself. If you want to follow along, we do have a full link to the build in the description of this video. Go ahead and click on it and you can follow along with us. Okay, so starting out here, this is our Hammer of the Ancients build. You can see we have a skill tab here at the top, which would link you up to the talent tree. And we also have a Paragon board here that we will talk about here in just a bit. So let's go ahead and start out with the talent tree first, and we can just kind of look at what makes this build possible. And this is going to kind of help us understand some of the synergy and the core aspects of the build. So at the very top, like we said earlier, we'll be taking Lunging Strike. Lunging Strike is going to be some of our main fury generation. It's also an excellent source of the berserking status. If you're not sure what berserking is, it's right here. It increases your damage by 25% and your movement speed by 30%. So this is an effect that we always want to aim to keep up on our barbarian, and we'll be able to do that again through Lunging Strike. In terms of modifiers, we'll be taking Enhanced Lunging Strike. This is going to heal us for 2% max life, and then Combat Lunging Strike. This is what gives us that berserking effect. Moving down here, we are taking Hammer of the Ancients. This is one of our core spells. This has a moderate fury cost, and actually what makes this really strong is not Hammer of the Ancients itself, but it is Furious Hammer of the Ancients. So gain 5% critical strike damage and critical strike chance for every 10 fury you had when cast. This will also knock enemies down for 2 seconds. So you can kind of chain CC enemies with this, and you get a huge critical strike stacking effect from your Hammer of the Ancients. And then just to kind of fuel the fire, we do have Enhanced Hammer of the Ancients for more fury for each enemy damaged by Hammer of the Ancients, stacking up to 10 times. Moving down the tree, we are taking Warpath, which links up with Overpowering. Long story short, with Overpower, it's just a chance to deal bonus damage. So we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go a little bit further into the guide. We'll be putting 1 point into Tempered Fury for a little bit more maximum fury, and then moving down, we'll kind of start getting into some of our shouts. So the first shout is going to be Rallying Cry, and the main benefit from Rallying Cry is that it grants us something called Unstoppable. Basically, it means whenever you press this, you're going to be able to break out of any sort of slow stun effects, fear effects, etc. Anything that forces you to lose control of your character. It's also good for defensive purposes as well. Due to the modifiers that we take, we're taking Strategic Rallying Cry, and this is going to grant us both max life as well as Fortify. If you're not sure what Fortify is, it says it down here at the bottom. Fortified characters take 50% reduced damage. You become fortified when you have as much Fortify as current life. So we want to try to stay fortified as much as we possibly can to get that damage reduction. Putting 3 points here into Belligerence, so a stacking damage effect. 3 points into Imposing Presence. More max life, 3 points into Martial Vigor. Damage reduction against elites, 1 point into Challenging Shout. So this is literally only taken for damage reduction. It does have a taunt effect with it as well, and it gives us 40% damage reduction. And we'll be taking Enhanced Challenging Shout, which gives a little bit more bonus max life. Moving further down into the tree, we'll be taking Warcry. So this is going to be a secondary source for berserking, and it's going to give you a pretty big damage multiplier as well due to some of the modifiers. So first modifier is, of course, the berserking effect. The second modifier is Power Warcry. If at least 6 enemies are nearby, you're going to get an increased bonus damage effect for each enemy that's nearby by 10%. Moving on, we'll put 3 points into Raid Leader. So the way this reads, it looks like it's only going to heal your allies, but it actually heals us as well. And since we're getting so much CDR, we'll kind of see how this is strong later. But all these shouts that we're constantly casting, we're getting a lot of healing from this because each shout is going to be healing us. 3 points into Booming Voice, so your shout skill effect durations increased by 24%. 3 points into Aggressive Resistance, so gain 12% damage reduction while berserking. Move down a little bit more, 3 points into Pit Fighter, so we're going to get a little bit of damage amp to ourselves and damage reduction from enemies. 3 points into Slaying Strike, increase damage to injured and healthy enemies. Move a little bit further down, 1 point into Thick Skin, and we're only putting a point into this so that we can put 3 points into Counter Offensive. So as long as we're fortified, which most of the time we will be, we're going to be getting increased damage based on maximum life. And this is important because if you are stacking max life on a Barbarian, if you're taking these talents, you're going to get more damage from that as well. So a max life literally equals more damage in this build. 5 points into our ultimate here, Call of the Ancients. And this is going to be a skill that we kind of fall back on whenever we need a little bit more damage. And the Ancients themselves aren't super strong, but the buffs that we get from this are actually pretty decent. So just to read this out, since this is our ultimate, we'll read it. Summon 3 Ancients to aid you in battle for 6 seconds. While Call of the Ancients is active, you're going to gain 50% move speed and 20% distance damage reduction. The next 3 sentences just talks about the Ancestors' abilities. And we'll move up to the modifiers. So the first one's going to be Prime, Call of the Ancients. It's going to give you bonus attack speed and increased damage. And then the final one here, Supreme, Call of the Ancients, from each of these Ancestors. Moving a little bit further down, 3 points into heavy-handed. So more crit strike damage from 2-handed weapons. 3 points into brute force. More bonus damage from our current life. 3 points into a wall up. Your skills. So increased damage to both stunned or vulnerable enemies. And then finally, 1 point down here into Embrattled Rage. So core skills do 45% increased damage, but cost 100% more fury. And then almost like an execute down here, the damage is doubled against injured enemies. Okay, so that's our skills. Let's talk a little bit about some of the gear that kind of brings this build to life. So first one we're talking about here is our Crown of Lucian. So you can get this, you can see at the bottom here, this drops from Infernal Hordes. So farm Infernal Hordes and this will eventually drop. This is great for the cooldown reduction that we get from this. This can give us a more uptime on our shouts, which is absolutely huge for this build. You want to get uptime on your shouts. It's very, very important. So let's quickly talk about that really quick. Let's talk about our shouts. So we'll go down to our Bold Chieftain Soulwatch Hoop here, and we can take a look at this aspect. We'll bring it up here. This is the Bold Chieftain's aspect. So whenever you cast a shout skill, its cooldown, its active cooldown is reduced by 10 to 30% per nearby enemy up to a maximum of 70%. So this is probably the most core aspect on just about any sort of, I don't say any barb build, but any barb build that runs shouts. This is like a mandatory aspect to have. Because without your shouts up, you're extremely weak. So you want to make sure you always have at least one shout active, and you can't keep them up without this aspect. So of course, it's a random world drop, but you could go like Diablo.trade, farm up some gold, find somebody to trade it to you, but make sure that this is a aspect that you're targeting early. So in our neck will be, or excuse me, in our chest will be running Mantle of Mountain's Fury. So you're going to want to target farm this from the Beast in the Ice. So get some Lair Boss keys, right? Go in there and target farm him. Probably within a kill, probably 3 kills max, you're going to see this thing drop. And this is insanely strong. It's very core to this build because this is going to give us 16 levels to Hammer of the Ancients, which is absolutely insane. And then also the passive effect here. So Hammer of the Ancients forms a seismic line that deals damage and slows enemies hit by 80% for 4 seconds. Earthquakes it passes through explode for their total damage and are consumed. So you see it's talking about earthquakes here. So where are we actually getting that earthquake effect from? Well, we're getting it from a rune actually. And it's going to be the Lith rune paired with the Tech rune. And they both kind of synergize with each other pretty well. So the Lith rune stands still while fighting for 0.3 seconds. We're going to gain this offering. And that's really how the Hammer of the Ancients barb works. Is you kind of stand in one spot and you hit your hammer on the ground a lot and you don't move. And while you're doing that, you're building up offering. And then through the Tech rune, this is where we're getting the earthquake effect. So it requires 50 offering. And it says, invoke the Barbarian's Earthquake, dealing damage to enemies within. Not much you really need to know about that, except basically when you stand still and build up enough offering, this is going to proc. Earthquakes are going to go out, and your Mantle of Mountain's Fury is going to buff up those earthquakes. So that's how we're getting the earthquake effect in this build. And this Mantle of Mountain's Fury completely synergizes with these 2 runes here. Again, Lith and Tech. So moving on, that was kind of a lot there, but it's very core to the build. Edgemaster's Runic Gloves. So Edgemaster's aspect skills deal increased damage based on your available primary resource when cast, receiving the max benefit when you have full primary resource. So this becomes stronger as you are able to generate more fury. The more fury you have, the more damage you do, essentially. In our pants, we're running Tybot's Will. We're going to do increased damage while unstoppable and for 5 seconds after. And then when you become unstoppable, we're going to gain 50 primary resource. So this is very nice because we're able to constantly proc unstoppable through our shouts. Again, we talked about how Rallying Cry, the modifier, is going to grant the unstoppable effect. So we're able to proc that quite a bit. And basically, this just completely revolves around being unstoppable. You can see we get damage reduction while unstoppable. You get primary resource while unstoppable. So you can power farm both Duriel and Andriel for this. For our feat, we're going to Rekanoth's Wake. So what's really strong about this is the resist to all elements. Look at that, 54% resist to all elements. Just really all the stats are pretty decent here. We get move speed, we get CDR. The non-physical damage isn't that great. And then at the very top, attacks reduce evades cooldown by 1.5 seconds. Not super strong either. So we're really just taking this with the CDR, the movement speed, and the resist all. Now we also have a Bonebreaker of Earthquakes here, and this is going to be the aspect of Earthquakes effect or aspect that we're putting on this, right? So Ground Stomp creates an earthquake, damaging enemies for X amount of physical damage over 4 seconds while standing in earthquakes. And so this is the part we're after. While standing in earthquakes, and for 4 seconds afterwards, you deal 40 to 100%, 120% increased damage. Your earthquakes deal 40 to 120% increased damage. So we're kind of double dipping in that earthquake damage there. Flat rate, your earthquakes are going to deal more damage, and then while you stand in your earthquakes, you're going to deal even more damage. Now, we're not running Ground Stomp in this build, so you can kind of ignore the first part of that. But yeah, that is one of the main aspects that we're running. Again, we talked about Lith and Tech already. Moving on, we'll be running Aspect of Ancestral Force in our neck. So Hammer of the Ancients quakes outwards, doing increased damage. This bonus is doubled against bosses. So just funneling more damage into Hammer of the Ancients. We're also running the Bull Chieftain's aspect in our ring. We talked about that already for the CDR and shouts. And then Ring of Red Fury. So after spending 100 Fury within 5 seconds, your next non-channel core or weapon mastery skill cast within 5 seconds is guaranteed critical strike, and there's bonus crit damage. This is really good because we're standing in one spot, we're spending a whole bunch of Fury, we're regenerating it quickly, and we're able to funnel that Fury spent into critical strike. So another very good ring that you can pick up. And I don't know if you can see it here, but it drops from Echo of Varshan if you do want to farm for that. Okay, we'll talk about a couple more little things here. We're in our main hand. Offhand, we'll be running Accelerating Aspect. Critical strikes with core skills grant increased attack speed. Offhand, we're going to be running Vehement Brawler's Aspect. Casting an ult increases your damage for 8 seconds. And then finally, we'll be running Aspect of Limitless Rage. Again, I'm going to give this sort of stacking effect of doing more damage while we have maximum fury. For the runes that we're putting in this weapon, Ahu and Zahn. So Ahu, gain 15 offering whenever we hit non-healthy enemies. And then Zahn, just guaranteed critical strikes and guaranteed overpowers. All right, let's just briefly talk about some of the tempers that we'll be running in this. So you want to be tempering for Hammer of the Ancient size and critical strike damage wherever you can. And that's really it. Anything for Hammer of the Ancients, anything for critical strike damage is going to be really good. I guess there is one more. We want to temper for CDR on our Call of the Ancients, which is our ultimate. And you'll be getting that from your neck and your rings. Okay, then moving on a little bit further. It looks like we've covered most of the things. Let's go ahead and go into our Hoardric Spellcraft. So you'll be going the Nebulous Extract. And the whole reason that we're taking this is for that damage reduction. This is pretty good on Barbarian because you're in the thick of it, right? You're melee spec, you can't kite, you're not range. So the more damage reduction we can get, the better. We'll be taking Bloody Charm. We're seeing this on a ton of builds right now. This is going to give us that Execute effect. And that Execute effect is going to come from your Catalyst. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So you're going to be getting a lot of CDR on your Call of the Ancients. So you actually want to be putting this on your Call of the Ancients. Wherever your Call of the Ancients is on your skill bar, you're going to be lining that up with your Disintegrate. So this is going to apply a beam that applies a slow effect, and it also just does a ton of damage. So literally just about every build that I've covered so far has ran Disintegrate. I've not seen anybody that runs anything different. So same thing for Hammer of the Ancients Barb. We'll also be running Fractured Core here. This is going to reduce or remove that damage resistance R effect on some of these mobs. And then we'll also be running Potent Alloy to remove any of those pesky barriers that are on mobs and also knock them down. One thing that I did forget to cover is how are we applying Vulnerable in this build? If you're not sure what Vulnerable is, it's an effect that we can apply for basically mobs will take 20% more damage while they're vulnerable. And their health bar will get this sort of blue outline around it, and that's how you know if a mob is vulnerable or not. So the way that we actually apply Vulnerable is going to be through this Lucky Hit, which you can actually temper this in. So Lucky Hit, up to a 92% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. This is very nice because we don't have a great way to apply vulnerable outside of, maybe doing something cheesy down here with our Hoardric Spellcraft, which you can do. But the best way to apply vulnerable is through tempering with this Lucky Hit. So if you do run this build, just kind of keep that in mind. And do not skip out on that because you will lose a ton of damage by not tempering that Lucky Hit from vulnerable. All right, then last thing I'm going to talk about here, I guess, is our Mercenaries. So we're here in Variana, and you'll be taking Bloodthirst. So whenever this procs, you're going to get movement speed and unstoppable and some attack speed. And that's going to be cast. You're going to, of course, link that up to our Hammer of the Ancients. Then in terms of the talent tree, you'll be going into Ground Slam and then into Bastion. So really the stronger of the two is going to be Bastion. This is going to grant unstoppable. And this is going to redirect a lot of the damage you take to them instead. All right, guys, that's been it of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.